Hello and welcome, this is Redditusker. Today we're going to be talking about the Arcane stat, and its effect on weapons and spells that inflict status effect buildup. The status effects that we're going to be talking about are Bleed, Poison, Frost, Madness, and Death Blight. First, let's get out of the way Poison and Bleed, because those are the ones that people, for the most part, know how they work already. The basics of how this works is that the Arcane stat has no effect on status effect buildup unless the weapon that you're using has some arcane scaling. For example, the normal Uchi Katana has passive bleed, but by default it doesn't have any arcane scaling, so no matter how much you pump your arcane stat, it will not increase the bleed status buildup of your Uchi Katana. You can, however, put an Ash of War on that Uchi Katana and make it into an occult or a bleed Uchi Katana. This will give it some arcane scaling, and as a result, increasing your arcane stat will now increase the status effect buildup of the weapon. In contrast, the Serpent Bone Blade has an innate poison buildup. However, it has no arcane scaling, and it can't receive Ashes of War to change its scaling. So it's pretty much stuck at the poison buildup that it starts out with. Now, I'm sure most people know and understand that by now. It's the reason bleed-oriented builds are so popular in PvP right now. However, what's less obvious is that the same thing applies for bleed-oriented spells as well. Your arcane stat can increase the buildup of your spell status effects, but only if the Glintstone Staff or the Sacred Seal that you're using has arcane scaling on it. To test this, I used two different Glintstone Staffs, the Meteorite Staff and the Albinauric Staff. The Albinauric Staff has less sorcery scaling, but it has the benefit of scaling with arcane. So if the buildup was only affected by sorcery scaling, then the Meteorite Staff should have procced bleed first, or at least at the same time as the Albinauric Staff. However, as you can see, even though the Albinauric Staff had slightly less sorcery scaling, it procced bleed in 3 hits, whereas the Meteorite Staff procced it in 5. This shows that Arcane has the same effect on spell status effect buildup as it does on weapon status effect buildup, increasing the buildup only if the catalyst used to cast the spell scales with Arcane. Okay, now for Frost doesn't scale with anything. The Frost status effect seems to only scale with weapon level. It is a static value and it doesn't seem to change according to your stats. And the same thing applies for Frost-related spells. Even when using the Albinauric Staff, the number of hits it takes to inflict Frost on an enemy does not increase or decrease, which means Frost is unrelated to Arcane or anything else for that matter. Now, as for Madness, it does work for Madness weapons. But as far as I know, there's actually only one weapon that inflicts madness that you can also put an Ash of War on to change its scaling, which is the Fingerprint Shield. As you can see, normally the Fingerprint Shield has 70 madness buildup, but if you infuse it with Bleed or Poison, it increases to 88, which at least proves that it would work if there were any madness weapons that could scale with Arcane. Sadly, as far as I know, there are not. And of course, the way it works with the weapon in Madness is the exact same way that it works for spells. Your Madness buildup will scale with your Arcane stat if you're using the Dragon Communion Seal. This will be fairly obvious to anyone that plays PvP and has gotten hit with a Frenzied Burst incantation. The Madness buildup of Frenzied Burst is very high. I've actually never hit someone with it, even with an uncharged attack, and not immediately proc the Madness status effect. And if you do proc the Madness status effect, that's pretty much a guaranteed win, because you can fire off a second one before they've fully recovered from the Madness animation. It is a completely broken spell. I really hope they nerf it. I think most people know that Madness buildup does increase with Arcane using the Dragon Communion Seal, but just to prove it, I went ahead and tested it with 2 seals that have the same incantation scaling, and as you can see, the Dragon Communion Seal was doing more Madness buildup per hit. Alright, finally Death Blight. I really thought Death Blight would work, but sadly no, Death Blight does not scale with Arcane. With both the Death Lightning incantation and with Fia's Mist, there was simply no change to the buildup regardless of what staff or seal I was using. So, finally in conclusion, status effect buildup does increase based on your Arcane stat, but only if the weapon, Glintstone Staff, or Sacred Seal that you're using also has Arcane scaling, and only for Poison, Bleed, and Madness. It does not work for Death Blight, Frost, or Scarlet Rot. I'll be honest with you, I'm not convinced that this whole thing isn't all just a bug. I don't know why it would be intended for weapons that have some kind of innate status buildup, but have no way to scale with Arcane, wouldn't be able to increase their status effect buildup through just leveling Arcane. I'm not 100% sure it's a bug, but I'm also not sure that it's not a bug. Anyway, that's the end of this video. As always, thank you very much for watching.